Away from wars now, Britain's Parliament have taken a historic step to back a contentious legislation that would introduce assisted dying for terminally ill people. Lawmakers in the lower house of Commons voted 314 in favour to 291 opposing to send the proposal now to the upper house of Lords for further scrutiny following 4 hours of emotional debate. The outcome sparked celebrations among supporters gathered outside Parliament who say the assisted dying bill, if made law, will give people with an incurable illness the dignity and choice at the end of their lives. But opponents attending a neighboring counter-protest say they fear vulnerable people could be coerced into dying and urge the lawmakers to focus on improving palliative care instead. For more on this, former UK mayoral candidate Nims Obunge joins me now virtually. Thanks a lot for joining us on The World Now on TVC News. Where do you stand in the debate and what happens now?
Well, great question, Kevin. Thank you so much for having me. I was quite recently on Sky News, and I put an article in The Guardian about this particular position. It's quite clear there's an ethical concern for many families. Families feel that those who are on the side saying that this is really challenging, those who have mental ill health and feel very vulnerable, feel that what we should be building on in the UK is palliative care, like you just alluded to. And some might feel that they will be persuaded by their loved ones to end their life, especially if they're very ill. I know there's a notion about the dignity of life and death and being allowed to die with dignity, but we've got to remember that life is something given to us. And I say this as a man of faith, that life is something given to us by God. And I don't think it's for us to kill ourselves. And there is also the risk of the wrong prognosis. And I gave an example on Sky News, which I had to, because a certain mother spoke about how her own husband had to travel to a different country because it wasn't allowed in the UK. But in this same country, in the United Kingdom, my immediate senior brother was diagnosed with terminal cancer with less than 2 months or less or to live, had gone through chemotherapy, radiotherapy, and the whole works. And I can say that many years later, he is still alive, got married, and had children. Now, at that point in time, there was no hope. It was just a morphine. So, you know, if we were at that point where we had assisted dying bill, there was the possibility that he could have killed himself because he was absolutely in agony. And I also believe that what we've got to understand is it's a challenge for healthcare professionals who also will be struggling with, you know, there's an issue of trust. At what point do you say this person should be allowed to lose their own lives? And we've also, this whole notion of the slippery slope in Canada, 4% of deaths now are through euthanasia. And it started with one particular criteria, and it keeps going, it kept changing and changing. There's nothing we can do except hope that in the House of Lords, there will be much more stringent, a robust response to this, and possibly a pushback, so that the House of Parliament reconsiders its position on this. I recognize that it's difficult. People have had suicide tourism secretly going to other nations to kill themselves. We don't want that, but we want to demonstrate that there's something better we can do here in the UK.
All right, Mr. Obunge, let him put you on hold. We'll take a quick break and then continue our conversation. Please stay with us. You're watching The World Now on TVC News. On TVC News, we continue The World Now right away, and we're still speaking with Nims Obunge about the assisted dying bill, which has just been passed at the House of Commons. It's been moved to the House of Lords now for further deliberations. Well, information says that it's not likely the House of Lords will do an about turn to what the House of Commons arrived at. But what modifications do you see that could possibly play out at the upper house when they start deliberations on this bill?
I think that the upper house needs to look at the safeguards and look in great detail and have an extensive discussion around what safeguards are in place for vulnerable families and individuals, because it's now down to safeguards. We recognize that we may not be able to get an absolute turnaround, but the notion of the slippery slope, like what happened in Canada, how do we ensure we don't go on that pathway? How do we ensure that we don't start with a particular position here in the UK, and as over the next 4 years, by the time they try to put it into law, we find this notion of the slippery slope becoming the pathway, and it becomes a new option. We need to make sure that people with mental health don't suddenly pick this up as an opportunity to lose their own lives. And we've got to ensure that there are, for us, the desire is looking at the care versus dying, the care of life, because we need to try to get that message across. And we're hoping that the House of Lords will take a look at this in a more robust fashion. I recognize that, and let's be clear, it was only 23 that the position was lost in the House of Parliament by 23 votes, from 55 to 23. So the nation is still divided on this. And I think it's important to recognize, because the nation is still divided on this, there is still hope in the House of Lords that the regulatory position might be reviewed there.
Right. Does it help somewhat that the waiting period, if and when the law gets implemented, the waiting period is about 2 months by the time they do all the necessary checks to ascertain that the patient has a sound mind in determining he wants to take his own life? Does it help that it's 2 months for the waiting period, as against what we see in other climes where it's shorter?
I think Tesco, as a joke, would say every little helps. Every help is important. But then, whilst those 2 months exist, remember what I've just alluded to. Initially, the laws could say 2 months. And then after a while, you find that those positions can adjust over a period of time. And obviously, there's this notion about having a judge actively, the role of judges in this path. I think that those paths, that position is valid, but for those of us who feel this, we are not in support. I mean, I'm particularly not in support of it. And I'm not taking a political position. I'm taking one that is based upon the values of life. I think that it is useful, but I don't want to argue for it. If that, forgive my very clear this, I don't want to argue for it, because it assumes that I accept it as a forward. It's not, I don't.
Thanks a lot, Nims Obonge, for sharing your thoughts with us on TVC News over this crucial matter.